to the Experience Darden podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share a recent conversation with two second-year students, Matt Cunningham and Tom Allapat, as well as a first-year student, Katie Nolan, all about private market case competitions. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to the Experience Darden podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Matt Cunningham, Tom Allapat, and Katie Nolan. Matt, Katie, Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right. Well, let's get to know you a little bit better, and then we're going to get into our conversation about case competitions a little bit later. So, Matt, tell us a little bit more about who you are. Who are you? What's your background?
Yeah, I am a second year, so finishing up my last week here at Darden, which is definitely bittersweet. I also graduated UVA undergrad in 2019 as a systems engineering major, and after that, I went to work at Accenture in New York in our engineering consulting practice, and then came back to Darden the fall of 2023. I've really spent a lot of time doing operations and private equity portfolio operations work at Darden, and am also the executive vice president of the Darden Private Equity Club.
How did you decide you wanted to pursue an MBA? What led you to Darden?
Yeah, so I felt like I had gotten all out of Accenture that I could. And then I was also a member of Darden's Future Year Scholars Program. So I applied to and got into Darden the summer of 29 after I graduated undergrad. So I knew I had that in my back pocket, and did not apply to any other business schools. I knew I loved Charlottesville after going here for 4 years undergrad, and I knew I liked the case method that Darden has. So for me, would have been a waste of my time to spend some time on other applications. And that was definitely the right decision. I've loved my 2 years here.
Thank you, Matt. Katie, tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you and what's your background?
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. So I'm Katie Nolan. I'm a first year from Richmond, Virginia. Before business school, I spent a few years with Wells Fargo in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was helping lead risk reporting initiatives tied to regulatory deliverables. I was always drawn to environments where complexity met collaboration, but felt like I needed a few more tools in my toolbox. So that's what brought me to Darden. This summer, I'm joining ExxonMobil's investor relations team in Houston. So I'm excited to support their evolving transition from a low, traditional energy company to more of a molecular manufacturer and management, low carbon solutions. So it's a great opportunity to apply some of the work I've been doing through the Rotunda Fund, Darden's capital management ESG fund, and see where I can bring those insights back through an investing lens.
And if memory serves, you're a future year scholar as well?
Yes, I am. So I applied to Darden as a senior in college. Knew that I needed a bit more experience to be able to offer some value to my section mates, particularly through core. And so I was really happy to have the opportunity coming, right down the road from Richmond. Charlottesville has always been really dear to my family. And my little brother graduated from UVA in May. So while I know he's sad that we weren't able to be roomies, he was actually ecstatic. It was just an amazing place to be able to come. So it's been a great first year, and I'm looking forward to the next.
All right. Well, thank you for being here, Katie. Tom, tell us more about you.
Yeah, so first off, I'm also in Section B. I think all of us on the podcast are. So if you come to Darden, Section B is the best. But yeah, prior to Darden, I did my undergrad at Rensselaer Polytechnic, and I have an undergrad in electrical engineering. I worked in R&D for Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, building products from conception to MVP stage. And after doing that a few times, I realized my love was really in, the building the business side of the project or product. So I kind of knew I wanted to get an MBA to make a pivot into more of a strategic role. So that kind of led me to, pursuing my MBA. And here at Darden, I've been, pretty interested in investments. I managed the about $5 million for the student endowment through Darden Capital Management. And I just enjoy like these type of competitions too. I think Matt and I became pretty good friends as first years, and I think these type of things are a good way to flex all the learning you do at Darden because you learn a lot while you're here.
Thank you, Tom. That's a great segue. I'm really intrigued by this kind of case competition world, and people talk. Darden students got a lot on their plate between school and career and social activities. Um, Katie, what attracted you to participate in a case competition? What was exciting to you about this opportunity?
So two of my friends in Section B, Ellie and Hannah, pulled me onto a team. And so it kind of really just felt like a fun way to spend a Friday and Saturday. A lot of my friends were also going to be in the same room. So figured why not? I had been doing VC learning series throughout the fall. And so this was our first opportunity to put to work what we had been studying. We had really great second years, also leading us Leon and Adair. So we had a lot to learn from them. So ultimately, we just started forming a team. We pulled one of our other friends, Ashutosh Gihalt, from our section. We pulled another guy, Zach Hunsaker, that we met through Cav Angels. We knew that he had done due diligence, with them before. So we pulled him in, and then we also pulled Santiago Martin. He's kind of a wizard in Excel. So we knew that we would be able to use his modeling skills. So it was a pretty strong team. And I think it came together really nicely.
Tom, what was interesting to you about participating in a case competition?
Yeah, so I've done a few at Darden, and I think one of the most interesting things is, for this specific case competition, the private markets, we didn't really know what to expect. Matt actually just asked me if I wanted to do this, and we went into it with kind of an open mind that we're pretty well prepared from all the cases we read at Darden, and it seemed like a fun way to spend the weekend since Darden was going to pay for us to fly to New York City. If I knew how much work we were going to do, I may have been a little bit more prepared mentally, but it was really the exciting challenge. And I've looked at there's been a lot of Darden cases on, private equity and family businesses. And so I feel like this was a pretty interesting avenue. And Matt and I have just had so many conversations about stuff like this over the past 2 years. So it seemed like, a good way to really, get some actual practical experience and hear what people thought of our opinions.
Matt, how about for you? What was interesting to you about the idea of a case competition?
Yeah, so specifically for this one, this was the first time Darden had participated in this case competition around family business and really like kind of historic family businesses that are multinational conglomerates. So that was a really interesting topic for us because Darden doesn't have much course content on that, but it is an area speaking to some of the finance faculty that they're looking to grow. So we were excited to kind of go and take a new path there and see if it's something that we thought, one, that we were interested in, and two, were other Darden students interested in. And I think Tom would say the same, but a resounding yes. We do plan to send a team next year. And that was another interesting thing that all of the other 7 schools that were participating had been previous participants, so did have some counseling from advisors and previous students that had gone there. Some students had actually come for the second year in a row. So that was, I think, will be quite useful for our students next year in going and really doing a good job at that case competition. So to Tom's point, it was a combination of a new topic. I've done a lot of work with Tom, and then also just being able to go to New York for a weekend for effectively free was a very nice cherry on top for that.
All right, so we kind of got the broad strokes about what was appealing about participating in the case competition. Tom, can you tell us more about this particular case competition, what it was all about, what it was focused on?
Yeah, so this particular case competition was really focused around family businesses, and specifically how they adapt to changing environments and generational changes. So for what we were presented with, there was quite a large family enterprise in Brazil, and they had seen, the business model pivot from agricultural products to telecom, and they were actually, I think, one of the biggest telecom players in Brazil. And this space was being disrupted by, the internet and voice over internet protocols, and this family needed to figure out how they were going to adapt to it, really through like corporate venture capital, and then eventually like directly getting involved in the space. So over the course of the competition, it was staged in three parts. And so the first part, we came in, the first two parts we came into with our decks presented or ready to go. Actually, the first part, Matt, right? And the second two we made while we were there. And so we came in kind of understanding the initial project, or ask, and you present that, and then you get new information. The family actually comes in, and we talk to a family representative who is running the business, and that informed us for parts 2 and 3. Now, that was a lot of work. We had to make both the decks that night, and I think we only were allowed to start at like 8 p.m. And the first presentation was like at 9 in the morning or something like that. So we pretty much worked all night. I don't think we were entirely aware of how much of an ask that was going to be, but it was pretty amazing what we put together, and I think it was really kind of a cool capstone on what we learned at Darden. Because if anything, like it felt like another class, and so I was impressed at how well prepared we were. Um, one of maybe the most challenging parts of it was, the cases were vague, so we had to kind of identify what we thought were like the critical elements here. Um, and it wasn't just a purely like a financial result where, the finances were only one part. Managing family relations, creating, corporate structures to facilitate communication between the different generations, were also equally important. So, you know, it was definitely unique, and really a good learning experience because I hadn't thought about family businesses in that type of way.
And Katie, you mentioned the team that you put together from your section. It sounded like you sort of got all these different people, different skill set. Tell us about the competition that you and your classmates participated in.
Absolutely. So we started at Darden's internal venture capital investment competition, and so it's kind of like a real world simulation where students step into the shoes of venture capitalists. And unlike a traditional case competition where you pitch a startup, in the VCICs, you're on the investor side. And so you're evaluating startups and conducting live due diligence and deciding on where and how you deploy capital. So it started with the live founder pitches. They brought in students from UVA who put together a really cool startup, and then also some alums who pitched Noogs, and then some of our friends from the Charlottesville area. And ultimately, we started with their pitches, and then we moved into rounds of due diligence where we had 7 minutes to ask questions and a little over an hour to submit our term sheets. And so, you're building your investment thesis and negotiating terms, and ultimately you present your recommendation to a panel of actual VCs who judge how you think, and do you actually know what you have on your term sheet, and ultimately what those mean. So it was really fun. I think ultimately we won Darden's competition, and then advanced to regionals, where, like Tom and Matt, thanks to the Mayo Center, we had an awesome trip to New York, and placed second at Fordham's regional competition, which was really fun. So overall, it was a really intense couple of days, but amazing to be able to see the way that our team interacted and quickly come together to push something out the door was really impressive.
Yeah, it's great to hear about all the success your teams have had at these competitions. Matt, you and Tom participated in, I believe, Cornell's case competition for family ownership. How do you feel like your time at Darden prepared you for a case competition like the one you participated in? It was interesting to hear Tom describe, like, you had maybe not as much information as you like. You have to think about all these different things. How did Darden prepare you for that?
Yeah, I would say it prepared us perfectly, right? Because we were given a case, And to start, we had a week to prep it and come with a presentation. So I think every team's first presentation was very well polished, very well put together. Where we really saw the differentiator were in presentations 2 and 3. So the way the case competition was structured was after round 1, every team is ranked. After round 2, every team is ranked. And then round 3 was the finals, and the top 4 teams advanced. So we were the top ranked team in round 1 and round 2. And I think that was a major testament to our presentation skills. We were all very comfortable standing up in front of a room and talking to people that we didn't know, answering questions, and also kind of defending some more, I'm not going to say aggressive, but pointed questions from the judges. We were able to back it up and anticipate their questions, which is exactly what we do in the Darden classroom. And that was something when we received feedback that they really were impressed by. So to us, that was really nothing that we were directly taught. It's just when you do several hundred cases over 2 years, you don't realize how good you get at quickly distilling information and then explaining it in a very easy to understand way. So I think that's one aspect. And then the second was our ability to just structure our argument better. So like the flow of our presentations, I think, was another thing that the judges really appreciated. Where we were lacking in the final round, we ended up finishing in 3rd out of 8 teams, was exactly what Tom was getting at. And it's how you layer in the nuance of it being a family-owned business, because the right decision for a publicly traded company is not the right decision for a family-owned business where you're trying to keep grandchildren or future generations kind of in line or involved. And that's where we, I think, overlooked. And that's something that I think had we had some more time to really look at background of the case competition, we would have been able to weave into our story better.
Tom, how do you feel like your Darden experience prepared you for the case competition?
You're really echoing Matt there. I think kind of the ambiguity of cases and having to defend your point in class, helped a ton. I want to shout out Matt because he didn't say it, but Matt won Best Presenter at this competition. And I think that should definitely be noted because Matt is an exceptional presenter. But I think one of the biggest things is, really handling ambiguity and something I didn't expect to have such a big impact in how I think about things is actually stakeholder analysis. Darden's like one of the few schools that requires ethics as part of like your core curriculum. And in that class, we talked a lot about stakeholder analysis. And I think that was the crux of a lot of this competition. Who was actually being impacted and what was their, what do they want and what do they not want? Looking at that, kind of gave us an edge. And I think that was one of the big things, like big reasons why we did so well in the first 2 parts. And in the 3rd part, I feel like the competition was structured a little bit more difficult than we expected because since you made 2 decks at once, you make your final deck while you're making your part 2 deck. And I think part of it was, that making the decks at the same time, we may have combined some of the issues that we could have segmented better between the 2. And I think that's something future Darden teams will go in knowing this, and I'm sure they'll come out on top.
So Katie, Matt and Tom are in their 2nd year. You're a first-year student, and you were participating in this competition relatively early on in your Darden journey with your classmates. How did you feel like Darden prepared you for this, or how was this, helpful to you as a first-year student to be going through this kind of case competition?
Absolutely. I think really well. I agree with what Matt and Tom have shared. I think being able to approach a set of problems or even just the structure of a business in a way that you have to look holistically through the lens of all, you're not just looking at a business through the lens of your finance class or your accounting class to think, okay, how do their finances look? But you also have to look at it across all of your core courses, which at that point we were about halfway through core. And so I think it made it clear that you really can't just model a startup in a vacuum, or you can't just think about issues as just being accounting or just being finance. But I think that you need collective insight. And I think it also really drove home that you need a well-prepared team, right? So case discussions only go as well as your classmates have prepared for them. And I think that was true in our case competition too. We had an amazing team. And so I think it was really lucky that we had such a fun outcome.
So, Matt, I'm curious. Obviously, participating in this case competition, does it connect with your career goals in any kind of way?
I would say it does. It's definitely parallel. So I'll give some more context on career goals. So I'm going into private equity portfolio operations, which is effectively internal consulting for companies that are owned by private equity funds. So a lot of the portfolio companies that private equity funds buy are family owned to start. They're definitely smaller in most cases than the companies that we were discussing while at this case competition, but there was a lot of overlap from that family stakeholder aspect. And you just really need to consider different things when you're dealing with someone who founded and grew a business than if you were just dealing with the standard like publicly traded business or more of a large privately owned business that has some other like institutional investors. And then eventually I would like to own and run my own business. So ideally I'll be able to scale it to a level where we'll be trying to solve some of the issues we were at the case competition where my grandchildren are arguing over who gets like what CEO of what portfolio company. That's obviously like a big ask, but that was also overlap between there that ideally I would like to own and operate my own business at some point. So it is cool to learn about the different mechanisms that go into owning your own business versus working at a business that someone else owns.
How about for you? How does this case competition you participated in, does it connect at all with your career interest?
Maybe not as directly as Matt right off the bat, but I do have a pretty big interest in owning and operating a business down the road. Actually, I say this, but there's a like potential business idea I might go after at a Darden that would put me in this seat right away. So it was fascinating. I think one of the things that was interesting was how you think about things beyond, the initial structure of a small business or family business. Like this ended up being a pretty large business. And I think thinking about how you adapt to changing markets, that's pretty much true in every business setting you're going to go into, that things will change and your business will pivot and have to adapt to a different market. I mean, just as we've seen in the past month, a lot of companies have had to adjust. So to me, it was honestly a good thought experiment on how I would think about, you know, reacting to new technologies and adapting, just generational transitions, which is something I hadn't had much experience with before, this competition.
Katie, how about for you? How does the venture capital competitions you participate in, how does that connect with your career interests?
Absolutely. I think it was a pretty natural extension. I think thinking about the intersection of capital and strategy. And I think overall, I loved the due diligence process. And then piece that we also bring in financial modeling to talking to founders and being able to ask them questions and have the one-on-one interactions, all of that with pressure on top. I think where I end up doing that at this intersection, whether it's venture or growth equity or strategic investing, I think it's overall just sharpening my investing skill set and seeing, okay, how do you recognize potential and back it up?
I recognize you're about to graduate here, but what advice would you have for people who are looking at these case competitions, trying to figure out, is this worth it? Should I do this? I've got a lot on my plate. What would you recommend for those folks?
I've done 3 this year, and I actually did one the week I was getting married. So I would actually recommend to just go do it. Like they're very different than classroom experiences, and you get to meet a lot of different people. I think, Katie and Matt can attest. The people you meet at the case competitions are really interesting. We met, just fascinating people at the Cornell case competition. We met Pierre DuPont, who was an heir to the DuPont family, and he had a lot of insight, really, in the space of the competition and also just career advice. And I think some of the more interesting, opinions I've gotten have been doing these competitions. I think it's a really great way to augment your MBA experience and, show yourself what you've learned in the classroom, which, you know, I think you take for granted till, we did this presentation and it was funny. We had other business schools asking us after how we learned to make presentations like this. Then it was, we were all kind of stunned in the elevator after because, it's just normal at this point. And so it was really a good way to see how much we've learned and a good way just to, get out there and have a different experience with your classmates.
I love that point because oftentimes, I work closely with our working professional students, right? They're able to take what they're learning in class and take it right back to work with them. But as full-time MBA students, you don't necessarily have that same opportunity, right? You got to wait for an internship or after graduation. I like this idea that the case competition becomes a way of sort of seeing what you've learned and kind of testing some of these skills and maybe being able to celebrate some of that progress that you've made. Katie, how about for you? Do you think you'll do one of these competitions again?
Absolutely. It was a blast. So I think we'll definitely be back. I don't think that they'll let us come back with the same team. But if we were able to return, we would be there.
And to stay with you here for a second, what advice would you have for people who are kind of thinking about doing one of these competitions and trying to weigh sort of, is it worth it? Should I do this?
Absolutely. I would say lean in as the opportunities come up. Why not? Especially when, for the full timers, these types of things are right across the street. And it was really fun to have some of our executive MBAs also join us for the competition. So it's a great opportunity to do something that you might not have done and do it with people who maybe are doing it this summer or came from the VC space and are bringing. But I would say if you're not super comfortable with it, it's probably time to just jump in and do it.
I think that's great advice, Matt. What advice would you have for folks who are kind of weighing to do one of these competitions or not?
Yeah, I was definitely skeptical. I hadn't done a case competition before, and also as fun as it was to go up to New York, it's also like we're in our last semester. Do we want to take a weekend away from Charlottesville where there's other activities going on? But I'd have to echo what Katie and Tom said in that it's such a unique experience that I think a good subset of people at Darden take advantage of, but definitely not everyone. Like I'm definitely not a majority of people do case competitions, but the people who do always come back with the same positive experience where one, you just get to meet and network with other schools. Every business school is different. So it is cool to see the curriculum they're learning, how they prep for the competition, because that's just useful. Right. And then also more from a professional standpoint, I can only speak to the Cornell case competition, but effectively our entire team was offered a job by one of the judges. So like that was a unique experience. And there's definitely connections to be made there with either judges or other participants. I've had like continued conversations with one of the judges. It's not a job I'm actually interested in, but it's a really interesting space. And she is now aware of Darden and is looking to recruit at this school more long-term based off of the performance of Tom and the team.
Yeah, I like that sort of employment angle, the job angle of it too. You never know who you'll run into, who you'll meet on one of these competitions. Well, one last question for you before we wrap up. I've really enjoyed learning about case competitions. I come from the law school world where there's a lot of like moot court type activities, which is somewhat similar in that, people have a chance to kind of test their skills and see what they've actually learned. And so, Tom, I'll come to you first for this question. What's a piece of advice that you would have for prospective students who are listening to this podcast and kind of thinking about their own MBA journeys?
I think it's important to be curious. Coming into business school, things happen really fast in your first year. But it's important to kind of cast a wide net still of interest. Even if you know what you want to do career wise, it's still great, to get out there and try different things. I wasn't that interested in these type of, private equity, smaller businesses. And really, just taking an interest, taking a class or two, I found the space is quite interesting. And If I had been more just singularly focused, I would never have explored that. And now this might be something I end up doing. So if I could say anything, it's definitely come in and you probably have some in your mind something you want to do, but also just be open to other opportunities as well.
Katie, how about you? What's a piece of advice you would share with our prospective student listeners?
Oh gosh, with 2 second years here, I don't know if I have the wisdom to give just yet, but I think so far I would say just saying yes to what scares you and then figuring it out after. I think to echo Tom, there's a lot, going to school with people that are mostly type A for the most part, making sure that everyone is as equally comfortable isn't always where we're doing the most amount of growth. So I think, worst case, try something and you don't like it and you have a fun story and maybe you made a friend or two. In best case, you end up surprising yourself and finding something that you love. So I'd just say, don't wait till you feel ready. Again, jump in.
All right, Matt, you get the final word here. Piece of advice for our prospective student listeners.
Yeah, I mean, the Darden classroom and again, the case competitions are a sandbox, right? Like there are no real stakes. Like you get to come and try out and practice different approaches and different methods. And it's okay to be wrong or to make a point that you realize is wrong and change your mind. That's the entire point of being at Darden, is for you to have an opinion, be challenged on that opinion, and either defend it and convince people or change your mind. So I would echo and give advice to kind of exactly what Katie was saying, is take risks. Like you're not going to be comfortable raising your hand and arguing with a classmate in front of 70 people. But it's going to make you a better debater. It's going to make you a better employee, and it's just going to allow you to grow those chops. And I think we saw that perfectly at the case competition, where it was one of those moments where you didn't realize how much you learned over the previous year and a half until you were actually given the opportunity to use those skills in a scenario outside of the Darden classroom.
Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway. I think whenever you're doing something difficult, like an MBA program, creating that feedback loop for yourself and kind of to check in and celebrate, what you've learned and maybe test some of these things and find out that gosh, I can do things now that I couldn't have done 3 or 4 months ago. I think that's really, really important. And it's interesting to hear how a case competition can do that. So, Matt, Tom, Katie, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed learning about the case competitions that you participated in. All sounded really exciting. I like the idea of getting to go to New York for a weekend too. So that sounds like a pretty good deal. So thank you for coming on the podcast.
Hey, there's nowhere better than Charlottesville. Thank you for having us.
Yep. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
And that was my conversation with Matt Cunningham, Tom Alapat, and Katie Nolan, all about private market case competitions. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything like us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.